Hello, friends. You have probably heard more than once from our liberals that communism and Nazism are the same thing. Fascism is equal to communism, although it is not so. Nazism is equal to communism. There was no special difference between the Nazis and the communists before the start of the Second World War. Who was worse, Stalin or Hitler? There is only a difference in the shape of the mustache. But this is already the last century. Now there is a trend to say that communism is not equal to Nazism, but that communism is much worse than both fascism and Nazism. When people want to emphasize that certain regimes are bad, why they use the terms Nazi or fascist, but almost never a communist, given how much why the words communist causes much less disgust than a Nazi, but maybe simply because Nazism is an anti-scientific concept that biologists and anthropologists smashed to smithereens 70 years ago, and Marxism is a logically justified scientific concept, and many of Marx's conclusions, as if the inevitable monopolization of the market economy is confirmed by statistics. Well, let's look further. The communists killed 70 million people in China, more than 20 million in the Soviet Union, not counting almost 5 million Ukrainians and almost 1 in 3 Cambodians, that is, 20 million. Without Ukrainians, and taking into account the Ukrainians who died of hunger, it turns out in general I have all 25 million. I have a feeling that he recorded all the losses of the USSR during the Great Patriotic War as the victims of communism. Where did such figures come from? And to answer this question I will take a meta-analysis on the Allowed-in data portal dedicated to the victims of famine in the 19th and 20th centuries and choosing a lot of research on this the topic, and immediately the question is why 25 million more victims of communism in Russia and 70 million victims of communism in China are among the starving and not, say, among the repressed? Well, because it is clear that the communists basically exterminate the population because it takes a long time to shoot everyone, and this is how the famine was arranged, and all at once, corpses. So according to the chief researcher of Stalinist repressions, the Zemstvo, in total, from 1921 to February 1, 1954, 642,980 people were sentenced to capital punishment. You understand that 25 million and 600,000 are very different numbers, and apparently the main victims of communism should look for it among the starvation deaths. So we return to the mid-analysis, and the diagram is done according to his data. The victims of famine in Europe are marked in red, in yellow in Asia, and here they are victims of a big jump. Right, in truth, judging by the scale, it's only about 16 million. Country where are these 70 million corpses made by the Chinese Communist Party is not clear. Let's understand further. Read the annotation, and I will use Google Translator, so as not to torment you with my English pronunciation. By far the largest single event in our table is an event in China at the turn of the 1960s associated with an economic and social campaign led by small buts unknown as the Great Leap Forward. The initial results of this suggested an excess mortality of about 30 million, and this figure has gained some relevance. However, subsequent estimates have generally been lower. For our table we use the average between the lowest and highest data estimates in our main sources. 15 million is the lowest limit given by the 2009 study, and 33 million is the upper limit given a 2000 study. Well, i.e. even with the largest estimates of 70 million victims, there is still a footnote. Although there is great uncertainty about the exact number of deaths associated with famine within the Great Leap, it seems clear that in absolute terms it represents the largest city in history. However, in relation to the population, the mortality rate was modest compared with the mortality in Ireland, for example, in the 1840s, or the Finn, for example, in 1867-68, and was comparable to the famine of 1876 to 1879 in China. And who does not know the famine in Ireland in the 40s of the 19th century claimed the lives of 1 million people, with a total population of 8 million, and caused a frantic stream of migration by the beginning of the 20th century. The population of Ireland decreased by 50%, it became stupidly half as much actually. This entire influx of Irish settlers in the United States and England, captured in so many artist paintings, really took place in the 19th century, and so we have the most terrible, at least in relative terms, a famine that claimed the lives of 12.5% of the total population of the country's inhabitants, and that's why any famine under the communists is called a famine, a deliberate genocide, and so on. But when people die under capitalism and under the rule of the capitalists, for some reason no one talks about it, remembers, and if I remember, then the guilty wouldn't have it. Well, you understand, it just happened. Yes, a tragedy, but no one is to blame. Well, that accident has something else for us. You don't find it somehow, but it's not fair or something. And before returning to China, the famine of the 70s of the 19th century is this column that with the naked eyes even more than the famine of 60 right next to and who ruled China in the 70s of the 19th century, but about the Western government, and China itself was divided into spheres of influence between Britain, France and the United States. Then there is when 20 million people die, right from drought and economic reasons, then this is a communist genocide that must be remembered and condemned at the first opportunity. And when Britain has been bringing opium to China for decades, cultivating drug addiction, which leads to the degradation and extinction of the population, then that's all okay. It's not necessary to remember capitalism is not to blame for the excess mortality here. Stupid Chinese are to blame for the drought zero and someone else there. Well, in general, it is very objective to, and in general if you write down any victims under the communists as victims of communism, then this diagram should be read like this. Here the power of the communists in China begins. Therefore, this is this and this is the victim of capitalism in China and India, who is in power here and is to blame. Right, then, please explain Holodomor arranged by the British colonial administration in India in Bengali in 1943. But no, you don't understand this differently. When people die of starvation and disease in the court of countries, then this is necessarily a communist genocide. But when people die in Ireland, Finland and India, then this is hunger and disease, and capitalism is here absolutely nothing to do with it. In general, the uncle not only forgot to tell about the Holodomor that arose or for objective physical or economic reasons, long before the communists, but the victims of famine right at the steel did not multiply several times. In general, 10 seedlings of others out of 10 will throw pills, because we will now look further. The communists enslaved entire peoples in Russia, Vietnam, China, in Eastern Europe, North Korea, Cuba and most of Central Asia. They destroyed the lives of more than 1 billion people, so destroyed that the USSR was the second economy in the world in 1989, and the life expectancy of Soviet citizens in the mid-60s was comparable to European countries as the communists destroyed millions of lives in Russia. Very much it is clearly visible according to the data of Rosstat that capitalism began in Russia, mass extinction began. And pay attention to the fact that if we remove migration, that is, we consider only natural growth, then even in the well-fed 0 years, 500,000 citizens a year drank. Apparently this uncle lives somewhere. Then parallel reality. D and I won't even ask questions. See definitions of those words that he said, what it means destroyed. What a ruined life is when you can't buy gum jeans or a VCR. It's a ruined life. Or when you can't afford health insurance, like in the USA for example, it could be a ruined life. And yes, how did it happen that the communists ruined the rouge of people's lives, and then they say that life under the communists was better than now? Before the link to the statistics on hunger and these opinion polls in Eastern Europe, as always, I will leave in the description of the video on YouTube. The communists enslaved entire nations in Russia, Vietnam, China, Eastern Europe, North Korea, Cuba and most of Central Asia. I like the way he uses the construct communists enslaved entire nations, as if the communist is something external, some kind of aliens from another planet. They come from this very people. I am now for the especially gifted. I'll even draw a picture. Now you have the people of a country, and it is necessary to say that he was enslaved when some external force came and seized both the Czech Republic and France. France, for example. Nazi Germany enslaved, but when we have a civil war, one part of the people defeats another, a social revolution occurs. This is usually not called enslavement of the people, but propaganda from the bottom. Prager specifically uses this turnover, the communists enslaved the peoples, as if separating the people from the communists, as if they say that this is not the people are good, they could not choose communism of their own free will, they deceived it all, the damned commies, and the people we have are good people, and they want capitalism on. In fact, in general, everything is according to the precepts of Goebbels, especially for Dennis Prager and the Republican Party of the United States, on the section of which he functions. They explain when Japanese and American troops invade the territory of Siberia and the Far East during the Civil War in Russia, then this is enslavement. When we have a local population as a result of that Civil War goes over to socialism, then this is not enslavement, is a revolution. When India, Pakistan, Bangladesh is part of the British Empire, this is the enslavement of the peoples of these countries by the British. When in China the majority of the population supports communism and carries out a socialist revolution, first expelling the Japanese invaders, then the government of the Kuomintang, then this is also the enslavement of the people of first Hein. And so why communism does not have such a terrible reputation as Nazism? The first reason: people simply do not know anything about the deeds of the communists. Well, for sure, no one tells them about it 24/7. No one makes cranberry films, TV shows, games in which the communists are shown as a fiend. Well, again, the question is, how did it happen that residents of Eastern Europe, who not only heard about socialism but also lived under it for some reason, remember it and speak positively? Well, nothing more than the Stockholm Syndrome. While both the left and the right hate Nazism and teach about evil in its history, the left, and when I talk about left, I don't mean traditional liberals like Harry Truman or John Kennedy, who has never been disgusted with communism, but those leftists who prevail in academic circles and almost never teach in the history of communism. In short, teachers in schools and universities are to blame for everything, who are solid varnishes, and tell poor children about communism everything only the best they heard. I already have such a version, and not from anyone out there, from Ekaterina Schumann herself, of course, an educated class in the Western world. Now, all leftists will only get worse. Get ready for a Marxist on Mars. Steve drives a Marxist. How they get out of this is a separate story, but so far this is the case with everyone. To be honest, this is the only statement of Schumann that I really like. Just a delight for the ears. You can drive it on repeat as a motivator. You just listen to the educated class in the Western world today, all leftists, and with each next generation, all leftists are only getting stronger. Well, how did it happen that among the intelligentsia, among teachers and doctors and scientists suddenly appeared so many Marxists? But maybe because the intelligentsia has more critical thinking, has more time to study some statistics, and does not draw conclusions on emotions, which is why in academic circles there are a lot of leftists. They look at things more objectively. They don't believe the cranberries from the TV, and we don't have such propaganda that this purely historically happened. We stupidly, accidentally, well, Marxists somehow appeared at universities, and now everyone wound up there, and you can't get them out. You can't smoke them out of there, and it's impossible to replace them with conservatives either. It doesn't work. As soon as a new non-leftist teacher comes in, they immediately bite him, and that's it, and he also becomes the same as they are to this day. I remember, and damn. Reason number 2: the Nazis carried out the Holocaust. The Holocaust is an absolute and unsurpassed atrocity. The communists killed many more people than Nazis, but they never succeeded in surpassing the Holocaust. The systematization of genocide, the uniqueness of the Holocaust, and the great attention rightfully belonging to him helped establish Nazism as something worse than communism. Well, you understand. Yes. That's how the communists killed more people. They just didn't have a very good advertising campaign. But maybe the fact is that in Nazi Germany people were killed on purpose. Jews were drowned in stoves, were killed in gas chambers, and in the USSR and China, people died mainly from economic reasons. This was in the first years of power. Or maybe the fact is that when you starved in the 20s and 30s, not because of drought and economic instability, the government of the Soviets did everything possible in order to solve this problem. She sent an appeal to foreign governments and public organizations. She sold the gold reserves of the Russian Empire in order to urgently buy bread abroad, and so on and so on. Or maybe the fact is that no one poisoned prisoners of war in the USSR in gas chambers and did not force work to the point of exhaustion and treated them like human beings. So according to a statistic of 4,376,000 from Soviet captivity returned to their homeland, 86% of German soldiers, while less than half returned from German captivity. Such a cannibalistic regime of communists in the USSR looked after captured enemy soldiers as their equal. Reason number 3: communism is based on beautiful theories. Nazism is not. It is based on vile theories. Well, finally, at least one normal thesis in this video is only ugly, and scientific theories are really based on a number of scientific theories that Marxism is based on, while Nazism is based on the anti-scientific theory of racism and anti-Semitism. Reason number 4. The Germans exposed in detail the villainy of Nazism, took responsibility for them and tried to atone for them. The Russians did nothing of the sort in relation to Lenin or Stalin himself. Well, to start, that is, what else I will screw on. And in the 50s Stalin's personality cult was exposed and monuments were removed all over the country. Stalin's repressions were condemned by the leadership of the USSR. Extensive rehabilitation was carried out. Political prisoners and the victims of Stalinist repressions. Therefore, they began to repent for the Stalinist period back in the days of the USSR, and after the return of Russia to capitalism after the bourgeois counter-revolution, the Russian authorities did a lot to repent for the so-called crime of Soviet power in our country. A clear political, legal, moral assessment was given to the atrocity of the totalitarian regime, and such an assessment is not subject to any revised recognition of the Kaidan. Execution as a war crime of the Soviet Socialist Republic, veneration, and even more so, the addition of an anti-Soviet assay to the school curriculum, to the construction and maintenance of a museum in the Gulag, and monuments to the victims of Stalinist repressions throughout the country, and so on and so on, and so on. What Dennis says at the end of 3 minutes of his wonderful video is all a lie and a provocation of an even lesser degree. China exposed the killer and enslavers of millions of Mao Zedong. Well, I say personally enslaved. Killed millions in one snout about. He has a style, of course, some kind of kindergarten. Oh God, one of the best propagandists of conservative values in the United States here. Of course, on this track I want to say, not but another word is tougher, but we have places here with a commentator but a decent broadcast, so we will refrain. Reason number 5: the communists killed mostly their people. The Nazis, on the other hand, killed very few Germans. Well, if for you 8 million Germans who died as a result of the Second World War from hunger and war, they killed a little bit, then yes. Hitler killed a little bit, only 12% of the total population of the country, only third place in terms of relative losses in the Second World War after Poland and the USSR. Although the Germans by and large died of starvation from the bombing of the Allies, died on the Soviet Eastern Front at the hands of Soviet soldiers. Therefore, in principle, 80%, and here you can write communism and public opinion as a victim. This meaningless immoral term considers murder members of one's own group are far less significant than the murder of an outsider. That's why, for example, the fact that some blacks kill millions of other blacks in Africa does not attract almost any attention from world public opinion, but maybe because millions of blacks in Africa do not kill each other every year, so public opinion does not mourn about this.